The evening sun cast long shadows across Durango's muddy streets as Luke Carter adjusted his leather vest and took up his usual position by the weathered doors of the Mountain Rose Saloon. At 6'4" with shoulders like a bull, he cut an imposing figure, but those who knew him saw past the intimidating exterior to recognize the gentle soul beneath. Tonight, like every night for the past 3 years, he'd watch over both the paying customers and those society preferred to forget. The saloon sat at the crossroads between the respectable part of town and the growing Chinese quarter, where immigrant laborers from the Silver Creek mine lived in cramped conditions. Luke had grown up in these mountains, watching his father work as a healer for both the wealthy mine owners and the desperate workers who risked their lives in the tunnels. That legacy of caring for others, regardless of their station, had shaped him more than any other inheritance. Inside, Eleanor Hall was preparing for another busy evening, her fingers dancing across piano keys as she warmed up. The owner's daughter had a gift for music that drew crowds from miles around, though Luke knew her true talent lay in gathering information. Together, they had built a network of eyes and ears that helped them protect those most vulnerable to exploitation. The musical notes drifting through the swinging doors carried their own code. Tonight's melody warned of strangers in town. The first signs of trouble had appeared 3 weeks ago when Charlotte Lopez stumbled into the saloon, clothes torn and eyes wild with fear. She'd escaped from a wagon train that had promised safe passage to Mexican families seeking work in the mines, only to find themselves captives destined for sale to the highest bidder. Luke had hidden her in the cellar, while Eleanor sent word to her father's trusted friends among the mining families. The afternoon stage had brought 3 well-dressed men who set Luke's instincts on edge. They carried themselves with the artificial refinement of predators trying to pass as gentlemen, led by a silver-haired character who introduced himself as Nathan Allen. Luke recognized the name from Charlotte's warning. He was the mastermind behind the trafficking operation, though no law enforcement had ever managed to gather enough evidence against him. Joshua Nelson, the local sheriff, was more interested in collecting bribes from the mine owners than investigating disappearances among the immigrant population. Luke had learned long ago not to depend on badges for justice. His father had taught him that true authority came from the respect of the community, not from any official position. The network of trust he'd built would prove more valuable than any law book. As the evening crowds began filtering in, Luke spotted Isaac Carter, his younger brother and deputy mine surveyor, making his way through the gathering dusk. The brothers shared their father's strong moral compass, though Isaac worked within the system while Luke operated in its shadows. Tonight, Isaac's presence meant more than a social visit. His position gave him access to information about new mining claims and the movement of workers. The soft glow of oil lamps illuminated the saloon's interior as Eleanor's music shifted to a livelier tune. Nathan Allen and his companions had claimed a corner table, their attention seemingly focused on their cards and whiskey. But Luke noticed how their eyes tracked every movement of Rose Nelson, the young serving girl whose family had arrived from Mexico just last month. The predators were already selecting their next targets. Caleb Hall, Eleanor's father and the saloon's owner, emerged from his office upstairs with a ledger tucked under his arm. To most, he appeared to be nothing more than a successful businessman, but Luke knew the truth. The ledger contained carefully coded records of missing persons, suspected traffickers, and safe houses throughout the territory. Their father's legacy of protection lived on through this hidden network of mercy. As night settled over Durango, Luke watched the complex dance of humanity flowing through the saloon doors. Each person carried their own story, their own dreams of a better life in these harsh mountains. He had sworn an oath, not to any flag or badge, but to the memory of his father and the simple truth that every soul deserved protection. Tonight would test that oath as never before, as the forces of greed and exploitation threatened to tear apart the delicate fabric of their community. The piano music suddenly shifted to a minor key, Eleanor's signal that someone was approaching the back door. Luke caught his brother's eye across the room, noting Isaac's subtle nod toward the kitchen. Whatever came through that door would set in motion events that would either expose their protective network or strengthen it beyond measure. The time had come to prove that their father's legacy was strong enough to withstand the gathering storm. Luke moved silently through the kitchen's shadows, his boots barely whispering against the worn floorboards. Eleanor's fingers continued dancing across the piano keys, the haunting melody masking any sound from the back entrance. Through the steam of cooking pots and the sharp scent of coffee, he could make out Isaac's broad silhouette guarding the door, tension visible in his brother's stance. The door creaked open, revealing Caroline, one of their most trusted allies from the Chinese laundry at the edge of town. Her face was drawn with worry as she ushered in two trembling figures wrapped in threadbare shawls. Even in the dim light, Luke could see the exhaustion etched into their young faces. Sisters, he guessed, no more than 16 and 18, with the haunted look he'd seen too often in those fleeing the silver mine's shadow economy. Found them hiding in the supply wagon from Pueblo, Caroline whispered, her voice barely audible above the saloon's distant revelry. The foreman's men were searching every cart heading into town. These two escaped from the new boarding house they're setting up near the mine entrance. The way she spat out boarding house told Luke everything he needed to know about the operation's true nature. Isaac moved forward, his usually stern expression softening as he addressed the girls in fluent Spanish. Luke marveled at his brother's gift for languages, a talent that had proven invaluable in their work. The older sister responded hesitantly, her words tumbling out in a mix of Spanish and broken English as she described their ordeal. They had been promised work as maids in Tucson, only to find themselves trapped in a very different kind of establishment. Eleanor's music shifted again, this time to a lively reel that would draw the crowd's attention away from the kitchen. Luke caught the subtle warning in the change. Someone was getting too curious about the back room. He gestured quickly to Isaac, who guided the sisters toward the hidden cellar entrance beneath the stack of empty flour sacks. Caroline followed, already pulling out the clean clothes and blankets they kept stored for exactly these situations. Through the kitchen window, Luke spotted Nathan's wagon pulling up behind the saloon, right on schedule. Their older brother's legitimate freight business provided the perfect cover for moving rescued individuals to safety. Tonight's cargo manifest would show a shipment of preserved goods bound for Wichita, but the false-bottomed wagon would carry precious human cargo instead. The sound of heavy boots in the hallway sent Luke back to his post near the main room. Joshua, one of the mine owner's most brutal enforcers, was making his way toward the kitchen. Luke positioned himself in the doorway, filling the frame with his considerable presence. "Evening, Joshua." Kitchen's closed for cleaning. Health inspector's orders. The lie rolled easily off his tongue, practiced over countless similar confrontations. Joshua's eyes narrowed, alcohol fuming from his breath. Funny timing, considering I just saw Caroline from the laundry sneaking around back here. His hand drifted toward his gun belt, a gesture that might have intimidated a lesser man. But Luke had learned long ago that true strength lay in knowing when not to fight, in finding ways to protect without violence when possible. "Caroline delivers our linens every Tuesday night," Luke replied evenly, producing a stack of fresh napkins from a nearby shelf. "Unless you're particularly interested in the saloon's laundry schedule, I suggest you head back to your whiskey." First rounds on the house. The bribe was calculated, just enough to maintain his cover as a simple bouncer who could be bought, while steering trouble away from those who needed protection. Behind him, Luke could hear the nearly silent workings of their rescue operation continuing. The cellar door whispering shut. Isaac's murmured reassurances. The subtle creak of Nathan's wagon being loaded. Their father had built this network of sanctuary piece by piece, teaching his sons that true courage meant standing between the powerful and the powerless. Now, with rumors of an expanding trafficking operation threatening their mountain community, that legacy would face its greatest test. The piano music swelled again, Eleanor's skilled fingers weaving a complex melody that told Luke all was clear for now. But as Joshua finally turned away, muttering crude threats, Luke knew this was only the beginning. The forces gathering against them were stronger than ever, and somewhere in the darkness, more souls waited for salvation. His father's words echoed in his memory. Sometimes the smallest act of mercy can turn the tide of battle. Tonight, two sisters were safe. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. Luke Carter leaned against the worn oak door frame of the Golden Spur Saloon, his massive frame casting a long shadow across Durango's dusty main street as the late afternoon sun painted the surrounding mountains in amber hues. Behind his stoic expression, his mind churned with worry over the disappearances that had been plaguing the mining community. 3 young Chinese laborers and a Mexican family had vanished without a trace in the past month alone. The saloon's usual cacophony of tinny piano music and drunken revelry felt hollow tonight as Luke scanned the crowd, noting the regulars and watching for unfamiliar faces. His position as bouncer allowed him to observe everything while appearing to see nothing. a skill he'd honed over 5 years of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Eleanor Lopez caught his eye from behind the bar, giving him a subtle nod that meant trouble was brewing. At a corner table, Nathan Hall, one of the more unsavory mine operators, was getting handsy with Charlotte, a young woman who'd arrived on yesterday's stage looking lost and desperate. Luke had seen that look before on too many faces, and he'd made it his mission to ensure Durango didn't become another hunting ground for those who preyed on the vulnerable. "Time to close your tab, Mr. Hall," Luke announced, his voice carrying just enough steel to make the smaller man's hand drop from Charlotte's shoulder. The girl shot Luke a grateful look before slipping away toward the kitchen where Eleanor had arranged safe passage to Josephine Carter's boarding house. Luke's sister had a knack for helping people disappear when they needed to. Nathan Hall's face flushed red with anger and wounded pride. "You're forgetting your place, Carter. I own half the mines in these mountains, and one word from me could see your sister's precious boarding house shut down for harboring undesirables." The threat hung in the air like gun smoke, but Luke merely smiled, the kind of smile that made smarter men reach for their coats and remember urgent appointments elsewhere. Later that night, Luke met with Isaac Nelson, an old friend who worked as a clerk at the Durango land office. Over whiskey in the back room of Josephine's boarding house, Isaac spread out a map showing recent property purchases around the mining camps. "These 3 parcels," he pointed to marks in red ink, "all bought up by shell companies tied to the Hall family. Word is they're building something out there, but no one's seen any construction." Rose Allen, the town's schoolteacher, joined their meeting with a leather-bound ledger tucked under her arm. She'd been helping Luke track the disappearances, marking patterns that others missed. The missing people all had one thing in common. They were seen talking to Caleb Hall, Nathan's younger brother, within days of vanishing. He's been recruiting workers for some new mining operation, promising high wages and good conditions. Luke's jaw tightened as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The Hall family had always been powerful in Durango, their mining empire built on the backs of desperate workers, but this felt different, more sinister. His own father had died in one of their mines 10 years ago, and Luke had sworn on his grave to protect others from a similar fate. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Eleanor slipped inside, her dark eyes wide with urgency. "Luke, Joshua Lopez just rode in from the high country. Says he found something up near the abandoned Silver Creek mine. Fresh graves, at least a dozen of them." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Whatever the Halls were building in those mountains, it wasn't meant for mining silver. Luke spent the next morning making his rounds, checking on the network of safe houses he and Josephine had established throughout Durango. Their father's legacy wasn't the mines that had killed him, but rather the secret passages and hidden rooms he'd built into various buildings. Escape routes for slaves during darker times that now served a new purpose. Each location held supplies, weapons, and maps marking safe trails to Pueblo or Tucson. As dusk approached, Luke watched Nathan Hall's carriage roll past the saloon, headed toward the mountains. 3 covered wagons followed, their contents hidden beneath heavy canvas. Luke counted 8 armed men riding escort, too many for a routine mining shipment. He caught Eleanor's eye through the saloon window and gave a subtle signal. Tonight, they would follow those wagons and finally uncover what the Halls were hiding in the high country. The puzzle pieces were assembling into a picture darker than the deepest mine shaft, and Luke knew that before this was over, he'd have to choose between maintaining his cover as the simple saloon bouncer or stepping into the light to confront the evil that had taken root in his beloved Durango. Either way, his father's words echoed in his memory. A Carter stands for those who cannot stand for themselves. Luke waited until full dark before saddling his horse, a steady mountain mare who knew how to move quietly through treacherous terrain. Eleanor met him at the stable's back door, dressed in dark riding clothes with her medical bag secured to her saddle. As the town's midwife, she had legitimate reason to travel at odd hours, but tonight her skills might be needed for far grimmer purposes than delivering babies. Isaac spotted 2 more wagons heading up through Thompson Pass just before sunset, Eleanor whispered, checking her revolver. "That makes 5 total. Whatever they're moving, it's big." Her face was grim in the lantern light, reminding Luke of the day 3 months ago when she'd first brought him evidence of missing immigrant children from the mining camps. They rode in silence through the foothills, following the wagon tracks by moonlight. The late September air carried a bite of coming winter, and Luke pulled his coat tighter as they climbed. Behind them, Durango's lights dwindled until only the glow from the smelting works remained visible, a false dawn against the mountain's dark bulk. The trail switched back through stands of aspen, their leaves ghostly pale in the darkness. Luke reined in suddenly, holding up a warning hand. Ahead, voices carried on the night air, men arguing in low tones. He and Eleanor dismounted, securing their horses before creeping forward on foot. Through the trees, they could make out the wagons circled near an abandoned mine entrance. Lantern light spilled from the shaft, and armed men moved between the wagons and the mine's mouth. Luke counted 12 guards now, the original 8 plus 4 more, who must have been waiting at the site. Nathan Hall stood by his carriage, directing the operation with sharp gestures. "Get those crates moved before dawn," Hall was saying. "Caleb's bringing another group through tomorrow night, and we need this shaft cleared." A guard emerged from the mine, leading 2 stumbling figures, young women by their size, bound and struggling. Luke felt Eleanor tense beside him. The pieces clicked into horrible focus. The missing children, the late-night wagon trains, the abandoned mines that should have been sealed. The Halls weren't just trafficking labor for their mines, they were using the old workings as way stations in a human smuggling operation. The crates were people, and this was just one link in a chain that probably stretched from Mexico to Canada. Luke's hand tightened on his gun as he watched another pair of bound figures emerge. His father had built these mines to give people honest work and a chance at a better life. Now the Halls were using them to enslave the desperate and vulnerable. The time for watching from the shadows was over. Eleanor touched his arm, pointing to movement in the trees on the far side of the clearing. More figures crept through the darkness, but these moved with purpose, taking up positions around the site. Luke recognized Joshua's broad shoulders and Caroline's distinctive red-banded hat. Their allies had arrived. "We can't let them move these people," Eleanor breathed. "Once they're split up and sent north." She didn't need to finish. They'd seen what happened to those who disappeared into the Hall's network. Luke nodded grimly and drew his revolver. The simple bouncer who turned a blind eye was gone. Tonight, he would honor his father's legacy. Through the trees came a low whistle, Joshua's signal. Luke tensed, counting heartbeats. 3 short whistles answered from different positions. Their people were in place. He took a deep breath, remembering his father's words about standing for others. Then he stepped out of cover, gun raised, and called out in a voice that carried across the clearing, "Nathan Hall. In the name of the U.S. Marshal's Office, you're under arrest for kidnapping and human trafficking. Order your men to drop their weapons." The night exploded into chaos and gunfire. The war for Durango's soul had begun. The first volley of gunfire split the night, bullets splintering bark and thudding into the rocky ground. Luke dove behind a massive pine as return fire erupted from Caroline's position in the trees. Through the chaos, he glimpsed Nathan Hall's men scrambling to form a defensive line around the wagons where their captives were held. The traffickers had been caught off guard, but they were far from beaten. Eleanor slipped through the shadows like a ghost, using the uneven terrain to work her way closer to the wagons. Luke had initially resisted involving her in the operation, but her experience treating injured miners had hardened her to violence while preserving her fierce compassion. Now her medical skills might mean the difference between life and death for the imprisoned immigrants. Joshua's rifle cracked from the ridgeline, dropping one of Hall's men who'd been trying to mount a horse. The animals whinnied and stamped in panic, adding to the confusion. Luke used the distraction to sprint between cover, closing the distance. He could hear frightened voices from the wagons, women and children speaking a mix of Spanish and Chinese. His father had died trying to protect people like them. Tonight would end differently. "Hold your ground," Nathan Hall's voice boomed across the clearing. "First man who runs gets a bullet in the back." Luke Allen wiped the sweat from his brow as he crouched behind a pile of mining equipment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across Durango's industrial outskirts. After weeks of careful investigation, he'd finally tracked the trafficking operation to this abandoned silver mine. His heart pounded as he watched Joshua Carter, the mine's supposed legitimate owner, directing a group of armed men who were escorting terrified immigrants into the dark tunnel entrance. From his vantage point, Luke could make out Caroline Lopez among the captives, the young woman he'd been searching for since she disappeared from his saloon 3 nights ago. She'd been working as a cleaner, saving money to bring her younger siblings north from Tucson. The sight of her bound hands made his blood boil, but he forced himself to remain still, knowing that rushing in alone would only get them both killed. The distinctive crunch of boots on gravel made Luke freeze. He slowly turned to find Eleanor Hall, the town's librarian, and his secret ally in exposing the trafficking ring, crouched beside him. Her usually pristine dress was covered in dust, but her eyes blazed with determination as she whispered, "Nathan and Caleb are in position at the south entrance. Isaac's got the sheriff and his deputies waiting at the bottom of the valley." Luke nodded grimly, remembering how Eleanor had first approached him 6 months ago with her suspicions about missing immigrants. Her work cataloging the town's records had revealed a pattern of disappearances coinciding with Carter's mining operation. Together, they'd built a network of unlikely allies, from Nathan Nelson, the reformed outlaw-turned-blacksmith, to Caleb Hall, Eleanor's brother who worked as the mine's surveyor. The sound of approaching wagons drew their attention. Joshua Carter emerged from the mine entrance, checking his pocket watch with obvious irritation. Luke's jaw clenched as he recognized Rose Allen, his estranged sister, sitting beside Carter in the lead wagon. The discovery of her involvement had nearly broken him, but Eleanor's quiet strength had helped him see that family loyalty couldn't blind him to justice. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Luke gave the signal. Nathan and Caleb's diversionary explosion at the south entrance sent Carter's men scrambling. In the chaos, Luke and Eleanor moved swiftly toward the main tunnel. Years of breaking up saloon fights had honed Luke's combat skills, and he dispatched 2 guards with brutal efficiency while Eleanor used her hidden derringer to cover their advance. Inside the mine, the corridors branched like a maze, but Caleb's detailed maps guided them true. They found Caroline and the others locked in a makeshift cell, while deeper in the tunnels, they discovered evidence of an even darker operation. Forged documents and ledgers revealing how Carter and his conspirators had been selling people to mining operations across the territory. The confrontation with Rose proved even more bitter than Luke had imagined. When they cornered her in Carter's office, she revealed that their father's gambling debts had driven her to partner with Carter, seeing his operation as their only chance to restore the Allen family's fortune. "You were always too righteous, little brother," she spat, reaching for her hidden gun, but Eleanor was faster. The shot echoed through the tunnel as Rose clutched her bleeding shoulder, her weapon clattering to the ground. Luke moved to restrain her, his heart heavy but his resolve unshaken. Eleanor's hand found his arm, steadying him as always. Outside, they could hear the sheriff's men engaging with Carter's remaining guards, the battle for Durango's soul reaching its violent crescendo. In the aftermath, as dawn broke over the mountains, Luke watched as Caroline reunited with her siblings, who'd arrived from Tucson upon receiving Eleanor's telegram. The sight of their tearful embrace reminded him that family wasn't just about blood. It was about choosing to protect those who needed you most. Eleanor stood beside him, her presence a quiet promise of a different kind of future, one built on justice rather than legacy. Carter and his conspirators, including Rose, would face trial in Pueblo, where Judge Josephine Nelson, Nathan's cousin, was known for her uncompromising stance on human trafficking. But Luke's thoughts were already turning to the work ahead, transforming the mine into a legitimate operation that would provide honest work for the immigrants and outcasts he'd sworn to protect. With Eleanor's help, he'd found a way to honor his family's name by building something new from the ashes of the old. Charlotte Carter, Joshua's young daughter who'd been kept in the dark about her father's crimes, approached Luke and Eleanor as they prepared to leave the mine. "I want to help," she said firmly, her father's betrayal having awakened in her the same protective instinct that drove Luke. "There are more operations like this out there, aren't there?" Luke exchanged a glance with Eleanor, seeing in Charlotte's determination a chance to expand their network of guardians. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mine yard as Luke helped Charlotte load the last of her father's ledgers into Eleanor's wagon. These documents would prove crucial in dismantling other trafficking operations throughout the territory. The young woman's hands trembled slightly as she handled the papers, but her jaw remained set with determination. Luke recognized that same steel in her eyes that he'd seen in Eleanor when they had first begun this crusade. "We'll need to be strategic," Eleanor said, adjusting her spectacles as she organized the documents. "These ledgers show connections to operations in Durango, and even as far as Wichita. It's bigger than we imagined." She shared a meaningful look with Luke, both understanding that their work was far from over. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and approaching snow, reminding them that winter would soon make mountain travel treacherous. As they prepared to depart for Pueblo, Nathan arrived on horseback, his deputy's badge catching the fading sunlight. "The prisoners are secured," he reported, dismounting with a grimace from his recent wounds. But there's more. Rose started talking. Seems Joshua Carter wasn't the mastermind. There's someone in Tucson pulling strings. Someone with enough influence to keep this operation hidden for years. Luke's mind raced to the implications. The mine had been just one piece of a larger puzzle, and his family's legacy was still entangled in this web of corruption. He thought of his father, Isaac, who'd built the original mining operation with honest sweat and dreams of prosperity. Now that same operation had been twisted into something dark, but perhaps it could be redeemed through a different kind of family legacy. Charlotte stepped forward, her voice steady despite her youth. My father's contacts in Tucson. I know most of them. I attended their parties, heard their conversations when they thought I wasn't listening. I can help identify the leadership. Her offer carried the weight of someone who understood the cost of speaking against powerful men, but chose justice anyway. Eleanor began sketching out a plan, her experience as a former schoolteacher evident in her methodical approach. We'll need to coordinate with law enforcement in multiple territories. Josephine's influence in Pueblo will help, but we'll need more allies. She glanced at Luke, knowing his network of saloon contacts could prove invaluable. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Caleb, Luke's younger brother who'd been watching over the rescued immigrants, rode up with news. The families are settled in the old bunkhouses. They're scared, but willing to testify about what happened here. And some of them have skills, mining, carpentry. They want to help rebuild this place the right way. Luke felt a surge of hope at his brother's words. The mine that had once been his family's pride could become something more. Not just a source of ore, but a sanctuary for those seeking honest work and a fresh start. He thought of Caroline, their mother, who'd always taught them that true strength lay in protecting others. We'll need to move carefully, Nathan warned, his lawman's instincts evident. The people behind this won't take kindly to losing their operation. They'll try to retaliate, probably start with discrediting the witnesses. His words carried the weight of experience. Having seen similar tactics in his years as a deputy, Eleanor placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder, her gesture both protective and reassuring. We'll start by establishing a legitimate business front. The mine can provide cover for our investigation while actually supporting these families. Her practical nature had always balanced Luke's more direct approach to justice. As the group finalized their plans, Luke surveyed the mountain landscape that had shaped his family for generations. The setting sun painted the rocky cliffs in shades of gold and shadow, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could prevail. They had struck a blow against those who would exploit the vulnerable, but the real work was just beginning, transforming this place of pain into one of hope and redemption. The wagon wheels creaked as they began their journey toward Pueblo, where Josephine waited to begin the legal proceedings. Luke rode alongside, his thoughts on the challenges ahead. This wasn't just about bringing criminals to justice anymore. It was about building something lasting, something that would honor both his family's name and the trust placed in him by those who sought refuge in his protection. Luke Hall stood silently in the shadow of the looming granite cliffs outside Durango, watching as the last rays of sunset painted the mining camp in shades of blood and gold. Behind him, a dozen newly freed immigrants huddled together, their faces etched with exhaustion but bright with newfound hope. The human trafficking ring that had haunted the region for months lay in ruins, its leaders bound and awaiting justice in the town jail. But the victory had come at a devastating cost. Caroline Lopez clutched her brother Nathan's hand as she approached Luke, her dark eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. The young woman had been instrumental in helping Luke and Eleanor Carter expose the criminal operation, risking everything to gather evidence from within the saloon where she worked. Now, standing in the fading light, she seemed both stronger and more vulnerable than ever. "You saved us all," she whispered, her voice carrying on the evening breeze. "But Isaac, is he truly—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Luke understood. Isaac Allen, his closest friend and fellow protector of Durango's downtrodden, had fallen in the final confrontation at the abandoned mine shaft. His sacrifice had ensured the traffickers couldn't escape through their hidden tunnel network. The memory of those chaotic moments in the mine still haunted Luke. The thundering of hooves as Joshua Carter's posse arrived, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing off stone walls, and Isaac's final words, "Keep watching over them, brother. Some fights are worth dying for." Luke had held his friend as the light faded from his eyes. knowing the town would never be quite the same. Eleanor Carter appeared at Luke's side, her presence as steady and reassuring as always. The saloon owner had been his silent partner in this crusade from the beginning, using her establishment as a safe haven for those in need while gathering intelligence on the criminal operation. Her marriage to Joshua, the town's deputy marshal, had provided crucial official support when they needed it most. "The mining company men are here," Eleanor murmured, nodding toward a group of approaching riders. "Rose Nelson says they're ready to offer legitimate work to anyone who wants to stay." It was a small victory, but an important one. Honest employment would help the freed immigrants build new lives away from exploitation and fear. Charlotte Hall, Luke's younger sister, emerged from the gathering darkness leading several horses. She had transformed from a sheltered rancher's daughter into a fierce ally during their months-long investigation, using her family's respected name to deflect suspicion while they worked to expose the trafficking ring. Now she moved with quiet confidence, helping the survivors mount up for the ride into town. The journey back to Durango was solemn, but hopeful. Josephine Allen, Isaac's widow, waited at the church with blankets and hot food for the rescued immigrants. Her grief was evident in the shadows beneath her eyes, but she channeled her pain into purpose, just as her husband would have wanted. The church bells tolled softly in the distance, marking both an ending and a beginning. Luke's thoughts turned to the future as they approached the town limits. The trafficker's arrest had exposed corruption reaching into Durango's highest circles, including several prominent business owners who had profited from forced labor. The coming months would bring trials, testimony, and the difficult work of rebuilding trust in the community. Eleanor's Saloon would continue to serve as a sanctuary, its back rooms always open to those in need of shelter or protection. Charlotte had already begun organizing a network of safe houses throughout the region, connecting with sympathetic ranchers and merchants who could offer work and refuge to vulnerable travelers. The legacy of their fight would live on in these quiet acts of mercy. As the group dispersed into the town's lamplit streets, Caroline lingered behind with Luke. "Isaac told me once that you were more than just a bouncer," she said softly. "He said you were a guardian angel in disguise." Luke smiled despite his heavy heart, remembering countless nights spent watching over the saloon's most vulnerable patrons, stepping in to prevent violence or exploitation before it could begin. The last of the rescued immigrants disappeared into the church with Josephine, leaving Luke alone with his thoughts in the growing darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new souls in need of protection. But tonight, he allowed himself to feel the weight of all they had accomplished and all they had lost. The mountains stood silent witness to his vigil, their ancient peaks holding countless secrets of justice and sacrifice in the American West. Tomorrow, he would return to his post at Eleanor's Saloon, watching and waiting, ready to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. The trafficking ring was destroyed, but human nature remained unchanged. There would always be predators, and therefore always need for guardians. Isaac had understood that truth and had given his life to uphold it. Luke would honor his friend's memory by continuing their shared mission, one night at a time. As the church bells fell silent and the stars emerged above Durango's quiet streets, Luke Hall made his way toward the saloon, his steps purposeful and measured. The town's respectable citizens might never know the full story of what had transpired in the shadows of their community. But for those who lived in society's margins, the immigrants, the runaways, the desperate and downtrodden, the gentle-hearted bouncer would remain a silent protector, carrying on a legacy of compassion in a harsh and unforgiving land. The winter winds howled through Durango's streets as Luke settled back into his routine at Eleanor's Saloon. But everything felt different now. The ghosts of recent events lingered in every shadow. Isaac's sacrifice, the breaking of the trafficking ring, and the haunting faces of those they'd managed to save. Eleanor had noticed the change in him too, the way his usual stoic presence now carried an added weight of purpose. One particularly bitter evening, as snow dusted the windowsills, a familiar face appeared at the saloon's entrance. It was Charlotte, one of the women they'd rescued months ago, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 3 more frightened souls, newly arrived on the evening stage from Pueblo. Luke recognized the look in their eyes, the same desperate hope he'd seen too many times before. Charlotte had taken up Isaac's old role as a messenger between the scattered network of safe houses and sympathetic allies. She'd transformed her own trauma into a fierce determination to help others, working tirelessly to guide vulnerable newcomers to safety. Tonight's arrivals were Chinese immigrants who'd escaped from a mining operation near Tucson, where they'd been held in virtual slavery. The saloon's back room, once a simple storage space, had evolved into something of a way station under Eleanor's quiet supervision. She never asked questions when Luke needed to use it, understanding that some secrets were better kept in the shadows. Tonight, she merely nodded as Luke ushered the newcomers through the kitchen and down to the cellar's hidden alcove. Rose, the saloon's cook, had become an invaluable ally in their continuing mission. Her hearty stews and fresh bread had nursed countless survivors back to health, and her motherly presence offered comfort that transcended language barriers. She moved quietly now, preparing extra portions while humming softly to herself. The melody, a gentle counterpoint to the raucous noise from the bar above. In the months since the ring's destruction, Luke had discovered that their victory, while significant, had only revealed deeper layers of corruption. New predators emerged to fill the void, drawn by the promise of easy profit from human suffering. But the network of protection had grown stronger too, with survivors like Charlotte joining their ranks, each bringing their own skills and determination to the cause. Josephine, who'd once been merely a regular patron, now served as their eyes and ears in Durango's high society. Her seemingly idle gossip at tea parties and social gatherings often yielded crucial information about suspicious newcomers or unusual activity at the outlying mines. The wealthy wives of Durango never suspected that their casual conversations were being carefully sifted for intelligence. As Luke helped settle the newcomers, he caught sight of a familiar watch chain hanging from a hook, Isaac's timepiece, which Charlotte now carried as both a talisman and a reminder. The silver face gleamed in the lamplight, marking not just the hours but the continuing legacy of their work. Each tick seemed to echo Isaac's words about the endless nature of their mission. The next morning, Luke made his way to the small church where Nathan, the local preacher, had become another crucial ally. The church's cellar provided another safe haven, and Nathan's connections with other congregations along the rail lines helped arrange secure passage for those seeking to reunite with family or start fresh elsewhere. Today, they would plan the next stage of their newest arrival's journey. Standing in the crisp mountain air, Luke surveyed the town he'd come to know so intimately, its visible face of respectability and the hidden currents that flowed beneath. He thought of Caroline, now safely established in Wichita with a new life and identity, whose letters occasionally brought news of others who'd successfully escaped and rebuilt their lives. The work continued, quieter now but no less vital. Each small victory, a family reunited, a slave freed, a runaway protected, added another thread to the tapestry of resistance they'd woven. Luke understood now that true strength lay not in the battles won, but in the persistent, patient commitment to standing watch, night after night, ready to extend a helping hand to those in need. As he walked back to the saloon, the morning sun casting long shadows across the street, Luke felt the weight of Isaac's legacy settling comfortably on his shoulders. The town was stirring to life around him, its citizens going about their daily routines, unaware of the quiet guardians who kept their vigil in the shadows. And that, he realized, was exactly as it should be.